In this session, we're going to try and answer the question of what are horizontal and vertical lines. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be identifying these types of lines and drawing them as well. This is something that we're going to apply to learning about the different ways that you can draw two-dimensional shapes. So when you're giving someone a description or instructions on how to draw it, it's going to make our instructions that little bit more precise. So let's have a little look at our textbook and see what our first problem is. So we can see that our first problem relates to our bookshelves, and we're being told that the shelf should be 1 meter 50 centimeters high. But then the girl's looking at one set and saying that we need to fix this shelf. So for question 1a, we're asked, explain why the books have fallen over on one shelf and not on the other. So take a really careful look at those shelves and think about what is the same about them. And then see whether you can spot whether there's anything that's different. Then think to yourself, why do we normally design shelves in a certain way? These two sets of questions will help you be able to answer and explain really concisely, nice and quickly, what is wrong with one of the shelves and what isn't with the other. Then for question 1b, we're being asked, how can the shelf be fixed? So have a little think about that one when you're looking at it and think about how one of them isn't working properly. What could you do to that shelf to make it work the way that you want a shelf to work? So for those questions again, for question 1a, explain why the books have fallen over on one shelf but not on the other. So thinking about those similarities and differences. And for question 1b, how can you fix the shelf where the books are falling over? Think about a strategy that you might do in real world. Pause the video now. Have a little bit of think about those questions and come and join me when we're ready to talk about the strategies. So for question 1a, we're asked to explain why the books have fallen over on one shelf and not the other. And if we look at the first set of shelves, the one where the books aren't falling over, you can see that both ends of that shelf are the same height. What this means is that shelf is horizontal. It's the same height all the way along. However, when we look at the other shelf, we can see it's not horizontal. One end is higher than the other, or one end is lower than the other. So the books have stood up nicely on the horizontal shelf, but they've fallen over on the other shelf, which isn't horizontal. And the word horizontal means a straight line that is perfectly level from left to right. And you can think about this word horizontal. If we were to play a game with a tennis ball, if you had your racket and you were trying to bounce that tennis ball on it, if that bat is horizontal, the ball will stay completely still. And if it's not, it will wobble around and it will try and roll. Another example is the idea for horizon. On this picture, you can see that there's a straight and level line between the sea and the sky, which is called the horizon. And this helps us to realize that the word horizontal means level and flat from left to right or right to left. It's not going to go up at any sides. It's not going to be wobbly. It's going to be nice and flat. So to answer question 1a, why have the books fallen over on one shelf and not the other? Well, one shelf is horizontal, it's nice and flat and straight. The other shelf is not horizontal. One side is higher than the other. And that's caused the books to fall over. And then for question 1b, we're asked, how can the shelf be fixed? Well, if we're saying that the books have fallen over because it's not horizontal, we've got to come up with a strategy where we can make that shelf horizontal. So we can make it so both sides are the same height. And looking at the measurements that we're being told, one side of this shelf is 1 meter and 50 centimeters, and the other side is 1 meter and 55 centimeters, so it's another 5 centimeters higher. So what can we do to make both these sides the same height? Well, option 1 would be to make both sides 1 meter and 55. So it would be taking the lower side and making it higher. So it's horizontal and flat along with the other side. And our alternative option is not to make one side higher, but to make one side lower. So we make both sides 1 meter and 50 centimeters. So in this case, we've got two choices. The shelf can be fixed by raising one end to 1.55 meters or lowering the other end to 1.50 meters. So now we've managed to complete that first sentence. We're going to carry on with our textbook, and then we're going to be moving on to that independent work in the workbook. So let's take a look at our Think Together question. So for our next question, we're being asked to look at these three fences and think about what is the same and what is different about each one. Now, when you're looking at these, I want you to be thinking about some mathematical vocabulary. We've already visited the world of horizontal, which means it's flat and straight from left to right, all being the same height. And I'm going to introduce you to another word now, which is vertical. And this is those lines that go up, down. Now, if you remember previously, we've looked at this idea of perpendicular, and a vertical line runs perpendicular to a horizontal line. So if you join a horizontal and a vertical line, you get a perfect right angle. So with your horizontal, you're thinking from left to right, like a shelf. And for your vertical, you're thinking from up and down, or down and up, like a big tower. Be thinking about those words when you're looking at these questions to spot those similarities and differences. So which parts of these fences are horizontal? Which parts of these fences are vertical? Are there any similarities or differences between the horizontal parts of each fence? Are there any similarities and differences of the vertical parts of each fence? Remembering that we've got this idea that horizontal, flat, the same height from left to right, and vertical, the up, down in a straight line like a tower. So once you've finished the textbook, then moving on to your independent work in the workbook. And I look forward to seeing how you get on with this, because this will be something we'll be revisiting when we start creating our own two-dimensional shapes. It's going to be some of that vocabulary that we're going to be using to make our descriptions and our instructions to design these 2D shapes far more precise. So good luck, and I look forward to seeing your work.